Some folks say loneliness is the heaviest burden a person can carry, and Clara Finch had been carrying hers for years. At 52, she'd taught every child in Dry Creek, watched them grow and leave, while she remained in the same empty house night after night. Then a giant cowboy appeared at her door one evening, hat in hand, with words that would change her life. "I need a woman, and you need a protector." Most people would call it scandal, but Clara saw honor in his steady eyes. When cattle rustlers came for revenge, he kept his word with courage and conviction. Their practical partnership grew into something deeper, a bond built on trust and tested by the harsh prairie. What would Clara learn about love when it came not with sweet words, but with true protection? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered floorboards of Dry Creek's one-room schoolhouse as Clara Finch arranged the day's lessons on her desk. Her father's leather-bound Bible sat beside the inkwell, its worn cover a testament to 3 generations of faithful reading. She touched its spine gently, drawing strength from the familiar texture as she had every morning for the past 30 years. At 52, Clara moved with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent half her life shepherding children through their letters and numbers. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue calico dress, mended twice at the elbows, spoke of practicality over vanity. The brass bell on her desk had called countless students to attention, its voice now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. The schoolhouse held 16 desks, though only 9 were occupied this term. Dry Creek was shrinking, like so many prairie towns, as families moved west, seeking better opportunities, or back east to the cities. Clara had taught the parents of most of her current students, watching generations pass through these same wooden seats, learning their letters on the same slate boards. "Miss Finch, my ma says you're going to get married," piped up 8-year-old Tommy Patterson, his freckled face bright with curiosity. Clara's cheeks warmed, but she maintained her composure. "Tommy, we don't discuss personal matters during arithmetic time. Now, show me your sums." The boy's question stirred memories of the evening 3 days prior, when everything had changed. She'd been sweeping her front porch, the same evening ritual she'd performed for years, when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider approached through the settling dusk, a man so tall he seemed to dwarf his horse, his shoulders broad enough to block out the dying light. He dismounted with surprising grace for such a large man, and approached her gate with his hat in his hands. Even in the twilight, she could see he was handsome in a weathered way, with salt and pepper hair and eyes, the color of storm clouds. His clothes were clean but well worn, the garments of a working man who took pride in his appearance. "Ma'am," he'd said in a voice deep as a canyon echo, "my name is Samuel Garrison. I wonder if I might speak with you." Clara had clutched her broom handle, not from fear, but from the sheer surprise of having a visitor. "What about Mr. Garrison? I've been riding through these parts, looking for honest work and a place to settle. I heard tell in town that you're a woman of good character living alone." He'd paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." She'd invited him onto the porch, offering him the rocking chair while she took the straight-backed one. In the lamplight streaming from her parlor window, she could see he was perhaps 45, with calloused hands and the straight posture of a man accustomed to hard work. "Ma'am, I'll speak plain," Sam had said, turning his hat in his hands. "I need a woman, and you need a protector. Not in any improper way," he'd added quickly, seeing her expression. "I'm talking about a partnership. Marriage, if you're willing, for practical purposes. You'd have a man to handle repairs, protection, and the heavy work. I'd have a home and the companionship of a good woman." The boldness of his proposal should have scandalized her, but something in his manner, respectful, honest, desperate in a quiet way, had kept her listening. "Why me, Mr. Garrison? You don't know me from Eve. I made inquiries. Folks say you're educated, decent, and alone through no fault of your own. They say you've given your life to this town's children, that you're respected. He'd met her eyes directly. I've been alone for 8 years, Mum. I'm tired of it. I figure you might be too. Clara had indeed been tired of it. Tired of eating supper for one, of mending her own roof, of having no one to share the small joys and sorrows of daily life. Her parents had died of fever 15 years ago, and her younger brother had been killed in a mining accident out in Colorado. She'd never had suitors. Her dedication to teaching and her sharp tongue had discouraged most men in a town where eligible women were expected to be soft and compliant. What would people say? She'd asked. They'll talk either way, Sam had replied. Question is whether you care more about their talk or your own happiness. Now, 3 days later, the whole town was buzzing with the news of their engagement. Clara had agreed to Sam's proposal after 2 more conversations, both conducted on her porch under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Hendricks, who lived across the street and made gossip her full-time occupation. The arrangement was simple. They would marry within the month. Sam would move into her late father's room, and they would live as respectful companions. No expectations beyond mutual assistance and companionship. Clara would continue teaching. Sam would find work around town, and they would face their remaining years together rather than alone. Sheriff Morton had vouched for Sam's character after some discreet inquiries, reporting that he'd worked as a ranch hand up in Kansas and was known for his honesty and hard work. The sheriff, a man of 60 with a grey moustache and kind eyes, had been one of Clara's former students and trusted her judgment. If Miss Finch thinks he's decent, that's good enough for me, Morton had declared at Henderson's general store, putting an end to the worst of the speculation. Not everyone was supportive. Mrs. Hendricks, a thin woman with a perpetually sour expression, had made her disapproval known to anyone who would listen. It's unseemly, she'd sniffed. A woman of her age, taking up with a stranger. Mark my words, no good will come of it. But others, particularly the women who understood the challenges of frontier life, saw the wisdom in the arrangement. Martha Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, had been openly supportive. Clara Finch has given this town 30 years of her life, Martha had said firmly. If she's found a way to be happy in her remaining years, more power to her. As Clara rang the school bell to dismiss her students for the day, she saw Sam approaching the schoolhouse. He'd spent the morning helping old Mr. Peterson repair his barn, and now carried his hat in one hand and a small bouquet of prairie roses in the other. The children scattered like startled quail, but Tommy Patterson lingered long enough to stare up at Sam with wide eyes. "Mister, you're awful tall," the boy observed. Sam chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. "That's true, son. Your teacher tells me you're good with your numbers." "Yes, sir. She says I could be an engineer someday." "That's fine work. You listen to Miss Finch, you hear. She's got wisdom to spare." Tommy grinned and ran off to catch up with his friends, leaving Clara and Sam alone on the schoolhouse steps. She felt a flutter of nervousness, the same feeling she'd had as a young woman when the circuit preacher had visited and all the unmarried folk had eyed each other speculatively. "How was your day?" Sam asked, offering her the flowers. "Productive. The older children are working on their final compositions." She accepted the bouquet, touched by his thoughtfulness. "These are lovely. You didn't need to—" "A man ought to bring flowers to his intended," Sam said simply. "It's proper." They walked toward her house together, a comfortable silence settling between them. Clara found herself stealing glances at her future husband, marveling at how natural this felt, despite the unconventional circumstances. Sam walked with the easy stride of a man comfortable in his own skin, occasionally nodding to townsfolk they passed. "Any regrets?" he asked, as they reached her front gate. Clara considered the question seriously. "None. You. Only that I waited so long to find courage for it." That evening, as they sat on the porch, sharing a simple supper, Clara opened her father's Bible to read aloud, a tradition she'd maintained alone for years. Sam listened respectfully as she read from Ecclesiastes. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. Seems fitting, Sam observed when she finished. I thought so. Clara closed the Bible and set it carefully aside. Sam, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Always. Why haven't you married before now? A man like you, surely there were opportunities. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. There was someone, years back. It didn't work out the way I'd hoped. He turned to meet her gaze. I spent too many years thinking about what I'd lost instead of what I might find. Seems foolish now. Clara understood that feeling all too well. She'd spent decades convincing herself that teaching was enough, that she didn't need the complications of marriage and family. But sitting here with Sam, sharing the simple pleasure of conversation and companionship, she realized how much she'd been missing. Well, she said, smoothing her skirt, I suppose we'll make the best of it. Sam smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. I believe we will, Clara Finch. I truly believe we will. As the first stars appeared overhead, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to build something meaningful with this gentle giant who had appeared at her door. For the first time in decades, she wasn't facing tomorrow alone. Clara discovered the threatening note on a Tuesday morning, pinned to her front door with a rusty nail. The paper was rough, the handwriting crude but legible. Tell your man to move on, or you'll both regret it. This is friendly advice. Her hands trembled as she read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words might change. They didn't. She glanced around the quiet street, noting Mrs. Hendricks already at her window, watching with undisguised curiosity. Clara folded the note quickly and slipped it into her apron pocket. Sam was in the barn behind the house, mucking out the stall for the mare Clara kept for her buggy. She found him working methodically, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill. He looked up at her approach, and his expression immediately shifted from pleasant greeting to concern. What's wrong? He asked, setting aside his pitchfork. Wordlessly, Clara handed him the note. She watched his face as he read, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten and something dark flicker behind his storm-grey eyes. How long has this been on your door? His voice remained calm, but she heard steel beneath the quiet words. I found it when I went out to collect the milk. Could have been there all night. Sam folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. Clara, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before we made our arrangement. The tone of his voice made her stomach clench. What is it? My last name isn't just Garrison. It's Samuel Garrison, formerly of the Texas Rangers, Company C. I served 15 years before I hung up my badge. He met her eyes directly. There are men who might remember me, men who don't have fond feelings about my service. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet, though she remained standing perfectly still. What kind of men? The kind who make their living, taking what doesn't belong to them. Cattle rustlers, mostly, though some graduated to worse things. Sam moved to the barn door and scanned the street beyond. I put a lot of bad men in prison, Clara. Some of them got out. Some of them had brothers. And you think one of them found you here? I think it's likely. He turned back to her, his expression grave. I need to ask you something, and I want you to think careful before you answer. Do you want me to leave? I'll go today if you say the word. No shame in it, you didn't sign up for this kind of trouble. Clara considered his offer, weighing it against the fear that had taken root in her chest. But stronger than fear was a surprising surge of anger. She'd spent her entire adult life being careful, being proper, being alone. Now, when she'd finally found courage to reach for something more, someone was trying to frighten her back into her shell. I want to know exactly what we're facing, she said firmly. Tell me everything. Sam studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. There was a rustler named Wade Colt. His operation stretched from the Brazos to the Rio Grande. Took me 3 years to build a case against him and his gang. When we finally moved in, there was a fight. Wade's younger brother, Jerome, was killed, shot while trying to escape. Sam's voice grew quieter. I was the one who shot him. Was it lawful? Completely. Jerome had just killed a deputy and was fixing to shoot another when I took him down, but Wade never saw it that way. He swore vengeance before they led him away to Huntsville prison. Clara absorbed this information, her mind working through the implications. How long was his sentence? 20 years. But Texas prisons aren't known for keeping men the full term if they have money and connections. Sam's expression darkened. Wade, Colt had both. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming down Main Street at a leisurely pace, too leisurely for men with honest business. Clara recognized the middle rider immediately, a tall, lean man with pale eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. She'd seen him in Henderson's store the day before, asking questions about newcomers to town. That's him, Sam said quietly. Wade Colt. The riders stopped in front of Clara's house, making no attempt to conceal their scrutiny. Colt touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute before the trio rode on toward the saloon. He wants me to know he's here, Sam said. Wants me to sweat it. What will he do? Start with intimidation. Make life unpleasant until I either face him or run. Sam's hands clenched into fists. He's counting on me running. Most men with something to lose would. Clara found herself thinking of her father's Bible, of the passages about courage and standing firm against evil. Well, he's miscounted, hasn't he? That afternoon, Clara's student seemed unusually restless, and she soon discovered why. Young Tommy Patterson raised his hand during geography and asked, Miss Finch, why are there strange men asking questions about you and Mr. Sam? Clara set down her chalk carefully. What kind of questions, Tommy? They asked my pa if Mr. Sam was really just a ranch hand. Pa told them it wasn't their business, but they kept asking. Tommy's freckled face was troubled. They didn't seem like nice men, Miss Finch. Several other children nodded in agreement. It seemed Colt's men had been making rounds through town, gathering information and making their presence known. Clara felt a surge of protective anger at the thought of her students being frightened. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, she told the class. But you children don't need to worry about it. If any strangers approach you, you go straight to your parents or to Sheriff Morton. Understood? The chorus of, yes, Miss Finch, wasn't entirely convincing, but she dismissed them early and watched through the window until each child was safely away from the schoolhouse. That evening, Sheriff Morton came calling. He sat heavily in Clara's parlor, his hat balanced on his knees and worry creasing his weathered features. Clara, I think you and Sam need to know what's happening in town. Those 3 men who rode in yesterday, they're asking a lot of questions and making folks nervous. What kind of questions? Sam asked from his position by the window, where he'd been keeping watch since sunset. About your past, mostly. They seem to know you were a ranger, and they're real interested in why you're here. Morton's expression was grim. I've had reports of intimidation. They followed Mrs. Patterson to the market and made crude comments. They've been hanging around the school, watching the children. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. Are they breaking any laws? Not technically, but they're creating an atmosphere of fear, and that's not something I can tolerate in my town. Morton stood and moved to the window beside Sam. I've sent word to the circuit judge, but he won't be through for 2 weeks. Until then, I'm on my own, with 1 deputy who's barely old enough to shave. This isn't your fight, Sheriff, Sam said quietly. Like hell it isn't. Clara's been part of this community for 30 years. You're going to be her husband. That makes you part of it too. Morton's voice carried the authority of his office and the conviction of friendship. Besides, I don't take kindly to men who threaten school teachers and frighten children. After Morton left, Clara and Sam sat in the gathering darkness of her parlor. The threatening note lay on the table between them, a tangible reminder of the danger that had followed Sam to Dry Creek. "I could still leave," Sam said eventually. "Might be safer for everyone." Clara looked at this man who had brought both hope and peril into her quiet life. She thought of the children in her classroom, the fear in Tommy Patterson's eyes, the way the whole town was holding its breath. Then she thought of the years stretching ahead, empty and safe and utterly alone. "No," she said firmly, "running away won't solve anything. It will just teach bullies that threats work." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "We face this together, Sam Garrison. We made a commitment to each other, and I intend to honor it." Sam turned his hand palm up and gently squeezed her fingers. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Clara's voice grew stronger with each word. "Besides, I've spent 30 years teaching children to stand up to bullies. It's time I took my own advice." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and somewhere in town, Wade Colt was planning his next move. But inside Clara's parlor, two people who had been alone for too long were discovering that some things were worth fighting for. The morning after Sheriff Morton's visit, Clara woke to find Sam already up and moving quietly through the house. She found him in the kitchen, coffee brewing and breakfast nearly ready. His saddlebag sat open on the table, and she caught a glimpse of something metallic hidden beneath his spare clothes before he noticed her looking and casually shifted the bags aside. "Couldn't sleep," he explained, handing her a cup of coffee. "Figured I might as well make myself useful." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully, noting the dark circles under Sam's eyes. "What's in the saddlebags?" Sam hesitated for a moment, then reached into the bags and withdrew a tarnished silver star. "My ranger badge. Thought I'd put it away for good, but recent events suggest otherwise." The badge was worn smooth in places, the word ranger still clearly visible across the top. Clara could imagine it pinned to Sam's vest, a symbol of authority and justice in a lawless land. Now it seemed like a relic from another life, one that had followed him to Dry Creek. "You miss it," she observed. "Parts of it, the certainty, mostly. When you pin on a badge, you know who the good men are and who the bad ones are. Makes decisions easier." Sam tucked the badge back into his saddlebag. "Civilian life has more gray areas." They established new routines that day, shaped by the need for caution. Sam walked Clara to the schoolhouse each morning and returned each afternoon to escort her home. He spent his days working on repairs around town, fixing Mrs. Patterson's fence, helping Hendersons unload a supply wagon, mending harness leather for anyone who asked. The work kept him visible and available while demonstrating his value to the community. Clara found comfort in Sam's presence during these daily walks. He moved with quiet alertness, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings while maintaining easy conversation. She began to understand how he'd survived 15 years as a ranger. The man was aware of everything without appearing suspicious or nervous. "You're teaching me about vigilance," she told him as they walked home from school on Thursday. "It's not something you should have to learn," Sam replied, tipping his hat to Mrs. Henderson as they passed the store. "But until this business is settled, it's necessary." That evening, Sam began teaching Clara basic self-defense. They practiced in the privacy of her back garden, away from prying eyes. He showed her how to break free from a grab, how to use everyday objects as weapons, how to position herself to avoid being cornered. "The goal isn't to win a fight," he explained, as he demonstrated a simple wrist twist that would free her from someone's grip. "It's to create enough distraction to get away and call for help." Clara proved a surprisingly apt student. Years of managing boisterous children had given her quick reflexes and a firm grip. She practiced the techniques with focused determination, understanding that her safety might depend on remembering them correctly. "You're taking this seriously," Sam observed with approval. "A woman alone learns to be practical about such things," Clara replied, repeating the wrist movement until it felt natural. "I may have lived a quiet life, but I'm not naive about the world's dangers." Their arrangement was working well in other ways too. Sam proved to be an excellent cook, preparing hearty meals that Clara had missed during her years of simple, solitary suppers. He was also handy with repairs, fixing the loose board on the front porch, replacing the broken latch on the garden gate, and patching the leak in the kitchen roof that had bothered Clara for months. "You don't have to earn your place here," Clara told him one evening as she watched him oil the hinges on her parlor door. "I know, but I like keeping busy, and these things needed doing." Sam worked the door back and forth, satisfied with the smooth motion. Besides, a man ought to maintain his woman's home properly. The casual possessiveness in his voice, his woman, sent an unexpected flutter through Clara's chest. Their arrangement was practical, she reminded herself, but Sam's quiet claim felt surprisingly welcome. The town's reaction to their partnership remained mixed. The older women, particularly those who had buried husbands and understood loneliness, offered cautious support. Martha Henderson had taken to including small treats in Clara's grocery orders, cookies, preserves, a bolt of pretty fabric, just in case you might want something nice for the wedding. But Mrs. Hendricks and her circle continued their disapproving whispers. Clara overheard enough fragments, unseemly haste, desperate measures, no better than she should be to understand their position. The criticism stung less than she'd expected. Perhaps having Sam's steady presence in her life had given her confidence to worry less about others' opinions. The children in her classroom adapted quickly to Sam's daily appearances. He had a natural way with young people, treating them with respect while maintaining gentle authority. Tommy Patterson had developed a particular fascination with their giant visitor. "Mr. Sam, were you really a lawman?" Tommy asked one afternoon, as Sam waited for Clara to finish organizing her lesson plans. "Yes, son, for many years." "Did you catch bad men?" Sam considered his answer carefully. "I helped make sure people could live their lives without fear. Sometimes that meant catching men who chose to break the law. Are there bad men here now?" Clara looked up from her papers, interested in Sam's response. He met Tommy's earnest gaze directly. "There are some men in town who aren't happy about certain things, but Sheriff Morton and I are keeping watch to make sure everyone stays safe. Your job is to listen to your parents and Miss Finch, and to tell a grown-up if anyone you don't know tries to talk to you. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. Good man." That simple exchange reinforced Clara's growing certainty that she'd made the right choice. Sam understood children, spoke to them honestly without frightening them, and took his protective responsibilities seriously. As they walked home that evening, Clara found herself studying Sam's profile in the golden afternoon light. He was a handsome man in a weathered way, with strong features and kind eyes. More importantly, he was steady, the kind of man a woman could depend on when trouble came calling. "Penny for your thoughts," Sam said, noticing her scrutiny. "I was thinking that this arrangement of ours is working out better than I'd hoped. Even with the current complications?" "Especially with them. I'm seeing sides of you that might have taken months to discover under normal circumstances." Clara paused at her front gate, studying the house that no longer felt quite so empty. "You're a good man, Sam Garrison. Whatever happens with Mr. Colt, I'm glad you knocked on my door." Sam's smile transformed his entire face. "So am I, Clara Finch. So am I." That night, Clara lay in her bed, listening to the comforting sounds of another person in the house. Sam's quiet movements as he checked the locks, the creak of floorboards as he settled into the spare room, the sense of protected presence that had been missing from her life for so long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats from Wade Colt and his men. But tonight, for the first time in years, Clara fell asleep, feeling truly safe. On Friday evening, Clara found herself standing before her mother's old music box, running her fingers over its delicate inlaid wood. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay her mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had been removed only once in 37 years of marriage, when pneumonia had finally claimed her. The thunderstorm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Clara held the ring to the lamplight. Lightning illuminated her bedroom in stark flashes, followed by thunder that shook the windows. She'd always been nervous during storms when alone, but tonight felt different. Sam was downstairs, his presence a comfort she was only beginning to appreciate fully. A soft knock on her door interrupted her reverie. "Clara, are you all right? I heard footsteps." "I'm fine," she called, quickly returning the ring to its velvet nest. "Just restless with the storm. May I come in? I brought tea." Clara opened the door to find Sam holding a tray with 2 steaming cups and a plate of the ginger cookies Martha Henderson had included in her latest grocery order. His hair was slightly damp, suggesting he'd been checking the windows and doors against the rain. "I thought you might appreciate some company," he said, settling into the chair beside her window. "Storms can feel lonesome when you're by yourself." Clara accepted her cup gratefully, noting how Sam seemed to understand her moods without being told. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lightning dance across the prairie sky. "I was looking at my mother's wedding ring," Clara said eventually, gesturing toward the music box, "wondering what she would think of our arrangement. What do you think she'd say?" "She'd probably tell me I was being practical, which she'd approve of. But she'd also want to know if I was happy." Clara sipped her tea, considering. "She married my father for love, you know. They were childhood sweethearts. I used to think that was the only way it could work." Sam was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the storm beyond the window. "My parents married for practical reasons. My father needed a wife to help run his ranch. My mother needed security after her family died of cholera. But they grew to love each other deeply. Sometimes I think arranged partnerships work out better than passionate romances. They're built on reality instead of dreams. Is that what happened to you before? Too much passion, not enough reality?" Sam's expression grew distant. "Something like that. I was young and thought love could overcome any obstacle. Learned the hard way that some obstacles are bigger than love." Thunder crashed overhead, closer this time, and Clara found herself moving instinctively towards Sam's steady presence. He set down his teacup and held out his hand, which she took without hesitation. "I need to tell you something," Sam said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "These past few days, living here with you, it's been the most peaceful I've felt in years. Even with Colt lurking around town, even with all the uncertainty, I feel settled in a way I'd forgotten was possible." Clara's heart performed an unexpected flutter. "I feel it too. This house hasn't felt this much like a home since my parents died." "I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of our situation," Sam continued, his voice careful. "But I find myself caring about you in ways that go beyond our practical arrangement." The admission hung between them like the charged air before lightning. Clara studied Sam's weathered face, seeing sincerity and something deeper in his storm-gray eyes. "Sam," she said softly, "when you first proposed this partnership, I thought I was beyond such feelings. I'd convinced myself that companionship was enough, that romantic love was for younger people with fewer scars and disappointments. And now I think I was wrong." The words came easier than she'd expected. "I think perhaps the heart doesn't age the way the body does. Perhaps it just goes dormant, waiting for the right person to wake it up." Sam lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'd like to court you properly, Clara, not just as your future husband, but as a man who's growing to care deeply for a remarkable woman." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen and valued for who she was. "I'd like that very much." The storm raged outside, but inside Clara's bedroom, something warm and precious was taking root. They talked through the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, the small details that transform strangers into intimates. Sam told her about his childhood on a struggling ranch, his decision to join the Rangers, the satisfaction of bringing order to lawless places. Clara shared memories of her teaching career, her quiet joys and disappointments, her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. When morning came, they were still sitting together, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her in protective comfort. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. Sunlight streamed through Clara's lace curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny celebrations. "We should be scandalized," Clara murmured, not moving from the circle of Sam's arms. "Probably. Are you?" Not even slightly. She tilted her head to look at him. "Is this how courtship feels at our age? Less dramatic than youthful passion, but somehow deeper?" "I think it might be." Sam's smile was tender. "We know ourselves better now. Know what matters and what doesn't." Their peaceful morning was interrupted by urgent knocking at the front door. Sam immediately tensed, his protective instincts alert. "Stay here," he said, rising quickly. But Clara followed him downstairs, unwilling to be left behind. Tommy Patterson stood on their porch, his young face flushed with exertion and fear. "Miss Finch! Mr. Sam, you got to come quick. Those bad men, they done something to the schoolhouse." Clara's blood ran cold. The schoolhouse was her sanctuary, her life's work. She grabbed her shawl and followed Sam and Tommy at a near run through the muddy streets. What they found made Clara's heart sink. Someone had broken the windows, overturned desks, and scattered her carefully organized books and papers across the floor. Mud had been tracked deliberately through the room, and crude words were scrawled across her blackboard. "This is my fault," Sam said quietly, his hands clenched into fists. "They're trying to get to me through you." Clara surveyed the destruction with growing anger rather than despair. This was her classroom, where she'd taught 3 generations of Dry Creek's children. This was sacred ground, and someone had defiled it out of spite. "No," she said firmly, surprising Sam with the steel in her voice. "This is their fault, and they're going to discover that they've made a serious mistake." Word of the schoolhouse vandalism spread through Dry Creek like wildfire. By noon, a steady stream of townspeople had come to survey the damage and offer their help. Clara found herself deeply moved by the community's response, mothers arriving with buckets and rags, fathers bringing tools to repair the broken windows, children gathering scattered books with careful reverence. Sam worked alongside the volunteers, but Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the street for threats. When she found him alone in the schoolhouse during a brief lull in the cleanup, he was staring at an old photograph tucked behind her desk, a formal portrait of his former ranger company. "I'd forgotten you had this," Clara said, recognizing the image from when Sam had shown it to her the week before. "Found it on the floor with your other papers. Thought it might have been damaged." Sam's voice was heavy with something Clara couldn't quite identify. "Look at us so young and certain we were making the world a better place." The photograph showed 12 men in Rangers' uniforms, their faces serious beneath their wide-brimmed hats. Sam stood in the back row, taller than the rest, his hand resting on the shoulder of a shorter, darker-haired man who grinned at the camera with youthful confidence. "Who's that beside you?" Clara asked. "Jimmy Martinez. Best tracker I ever knew and the closest thing to a brother I've had." Sam's expression softened with memory. "He saved my life more times than I can count." "What happened to him?" "Killed in an ambush outside Laredo 3 years before I retired. Wade Colt's gang set the trap." Sam's voice hardened. "Jimmy died because I made a tactical error. I've carried that weight ever since." Clara began to understand the deeper currents beneath Sam's conflict with Colt. This wasn't just about law and order, it was about guilt, grief, and the ghosts of choices made in desperate moments. "You blame yourself," she observed. "I was the senior ranger. The decisions were mine to make." Sam carefully tucked the photograph back into his shirt pocket. "Maybe if I'd been more careful, thought it through better, Jimmy would still be alive. And maybe if you'd hesitated, more good men would have died. You can't know what might have been, Sam. You can only live with what was." Before Sam could respond, Sheriff Morton appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Sam, Clara, we need to talk privately." They followed Morton to his office, where he closed the door and pulled down the window shades. The sheriff moved like a man carrying bad news, and Clara braced herself for whatever was coming. "I've been asking around about our visitors," Morton began without preamble. Sent some telegrams to colleagues in other towns. The news isn't good. Sam settled into a chair across from Morton's desk, his ranger instincts evident in the way he positioned himself to watch both the door and window. How bad? Wade Colt didn't come alone, and he didn't come just for revenge. Word is he's assembling a new gang, recruiting men from 3 states. Some of them are wanted for murder. Morton consulted a paper on his desk. The 2 men with him are Jake Brennan and Luis Vega. Brennan killed a family of homesteaders in Kansas last year. Vega is wanted for bank robbery in Colorado. Clara felt her blood chill. What do they want here? You, specifically, Morton said to Sam. But there's more. Dry Creek sits at the junction of 3 cattle trails, and we've got the railroad depot. It's a perfect staging ground for rustling operations. I think Colt plans to use his revenge against you as cover for taking over the territory. Sam was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority Clara remembered from his ranger days. How many men does he have? At least 8 that I've identified, maybe more coming. They're camped about 5 miles north of town, near the old Brennan homestead. Morton leaned forward. Sam, I'm good at keeping the peace in a quiet town, but this is beyond my capabilities. I've got 1 green deputy and a population of farmers and shopkeepers. You're suggesting I leave? I'm suggesting you consider it. If you go, Colt might follow. Give us time to call for federal marshals. And if he doesn't follow? If he decides to punish the town for harboring me? Sam shook his head. I won't run from this, Sheriff. I've spent too many years running from things that should have been faced. Clara found herself thinking of the photograph, of young Jimmy Martinez and the weight Sam had carried since his death. She was beginning to understand that this confrontation with Colt was about more than their immediate safety. It was about Sam reclaiming a part of himself he'd lost. What do you need from us? She asked. Both men looked at her in surprise. Morton recovered first. Clara, this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment they vandalized my schoolhouse and frightened my students, Clara interrupted. Besides, Sam is going to be my husband. His battles are my battles. Sam reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. This could get dangerous, Clara. More dangerous than you understand. I understand perfectly well. I also understand that running away won't solve anything. It will just teach bullies that threats work. Clara squeezed his fingers. You taught me to defend myself physically. Now let me show you that I can be brave in other ways. That evening, as they sat on Clara's porch in the gathering dusk, Sam seemed lost in thought. The town was quieter than usual. People were keeping to their homes, sensing the tension that had settled over Dry Creek like a storm front. Tell me about Jimmy, Clara said eventually. Sam was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice soft in the twilight. Jimmy was the kind of man who made everyone around him better, brave without being reckless, funny without being cruel. He had a wife and 2 little girls back in San Antonio. Used to carry their picture everywhere. Sam's voice grew thick with memory. The day he died, he told me he was thinking about retiring, wanted to spend more time with his family. I talked him into one more mission, the mission where he was killed. Yes, I've wondered 1,000 times what would have happened if I'd let him go home that day. Clara considered this, understanding now why Sam had spent 8 years drifting from town to town, never settling, never allowing himself to build the kind of life Jimmy had died protecting. I think, she said carefully, that Jimmy would want you to stop carrying his death and start living the life he died to preserve. Sam turned to look at her, and in the fading light, Clara saw something shift in his expression, not quite healing, but the beginning of it. You're a wise woman, Clara Finch. I'm a woman who's learned that guilt is a luxury we can't afford when there's living to be done. They sat together in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared, both understanding that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the courage they were building together. Clara discovered her grandmother's shotgun on a dusty Saturday morning while searching the attic for her mother's quilting supplies. The weapon lay wrapped in oiled cloth beneath a stack of family Bibles, its walnut stock polished smooth by years of use. She lifted it carefully, surprised by its solid weight and the memories it stirred. "Grandmother always said a woman should know how to protect what's hers," Clara murmured, running her fingers along the engraved metal. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "Clara May, there's times when being proper ain't as important as being alive." Sam found her there an hour later, still holding the shotgun and lost in thought. "That's a fine piece," he observed, settling beside her on an old trunk. "Double-barreled, good balance. Your grandmother knew her firearms. She homesteaded with my grandfather when this was still wild country. Said she'd rather face down a dozen claim jumpers than one rattlesnake, but she was prepared for both." Clara handed him the weapon for inspection. "I'd forgotten it was up here." Sam examined the shotgun with professional thoroughness, checking the action and sighting down the barrels. "It's been well maintained. Probably hasn't been fired in years, but it's still sound." He handed it back to her. "Your grandmother sounds like a practical woman." She was. She also would have horsewhipped anyone who tried to intimidate her family. Clara cradled the shotgun against her chest. "I think it's time I learned to use this properly." That afternoon, Sam took Clara to a secluded spot beyond the cemetery where they could practice without drawing attention. He set up tin cans on fallen logs and showed her how to load, aim, and fire the old weapon. The first shot nearly knocked Clara off her feet, but by the 10th, she was hitting her targets with grim satisfaction. "You're a natural," Sam said with approval. "Your grandmother's blood shows. I'm thinking of what those men did to my schoolhouse," Clara replied, reloading with increasing confidence. "And what they might do next if we don't show them, we won't be intimidated." Their practice session was interrupted by the arrival of young Tommy Patterson, who came running across the field with tears streaming down his face. "Miss Finch, Mr. Sam, they hurt my pa." Clara immediately set down the shotgun and knelt to Tommy's level. "What happened, sweetheart? Tell us exactly." Between sobs, Tommy explained that his father had been coming home from Henderson's store when 3 men on horseback had surrounded him. They'd knocked him down, kicked him, and told him to mind his own business about certain folks in town. Sam's expression turned thunderous. "Where is your father now?" "Ma sent me to fetch Doc Williamson. Pa's hurt bad, Mr. Sam. He's spitting blood." Clara and Sam exchanged grim looks. The escalation they'd been dreading had begun. By targeting Tommy's father, a well-respected farmer with no connection to Sam beyond common decency, Colt was making it clear that anyone who showed support for Clara and Sam would suffer consequences. They accompanied Tommy back to the Patterson farm, where they found a scene that made Clara's heart ache. Tom Patterson lay on his kitchen table while Doc Williamson examined his injuries. His wife Mary hovered nearby, her face pale with worry and anger. "Broken ribs," the doctor reported quietly. "Maybe internal bleeding. He needs rest and careful watching." Tom Patterson tried to sit up when he saw Sam, but Mary pushed him back down. "You stay put, Thomas Patterson. You've done enough heroics for one day." "Had to be said," Tom wheezed, his swollen face determined. "Man can't let bullies run roughshod over decent folks." "What exactly did you say to them?" Sam asked. Tom managed a painful grin. "Told them they were cowards for picking on a schoolteacher and her intended. Said any man worth his salt would face you directly instead of skulking around like coyotes." Clara felt a surge of gratitude and concern for this brave man who'd paid a price for defending her honor. She took Mary Patterson's hand. "I'm so sorry this happened because of us. Don't you apologize for those animals' behavior?" Mary said firmly. Tom spoke truth, and he'd do it again. Her voice softened. "But Clara, you and Sam need to be extra careful now. They're not playing games anymore." That evening, Clara and Sam sat in her parlor, the shotgun cleaned and loaded on the table between them. The weapon seemed to change the very air in the room, transforming their peaceful sanctuary into something more like a fortress. "I keep thinking about Tommy's face," Clara said. That little boy shouldn't have to see his father beaten for standing up for what's right. Men like Colt count on that, Sam replied, his voice hard with old anger. They hurt innocents to make good people afraid to act. It's an old tactic. Well, it's not working. Clara's tone carried steel. If anything, it's making me more determined to see this through. Sam studied her face in the lamplight, seeing something there that made him smile, despite their grim circumstances. You know, when I first knocked on your door, I thought I was offering you protection. I'm beginning to think I was wrong about who's protecting whom. We're protecting each other, Clara corrected. That's what partners do. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the back door. Sam immediately tensed, his hand moving toward the shotgun, but Clara recognized the rhythm, 3 quick taps. Pause, 2 more. It was Martha Henderson's signal. They found Martha on the back porch, wrapped in a dark shawl and looking nervously over her shoulder. I can't stay long, she whispered, but I thought you should know there's been talk among the women. We're organizing. Organizing what? Clara asked. A council, to decide how we're going to help. Martha's eyes gleamed with determination. We've talked to the minister, some of the farmers, even old Mr. Peterson. Folks are tired of being afraid to walk their own streets. Sam shook his head. Martha, I appreciate the support, but this isn't a fight for civilians. With respect, Mr. Garrison, you're wrong, Martha interrupted. This became our fight when they started hurting our neighbors and frightening our children. We may not be rangers or gunfighters, but we're not helpless either. After Martha left, Clara found herself thinking about the network of support that was quietly forming around them. It reminded her of quilting bees, where women would gather to create something beautiful and useful from scraps that seemed worthless alone. They're going to help whether we want them to or not, she told Sam. I know. That's what worries me. Sam checked the locks on the doors and windows, a nightly ritual that had become second nature. But it's also what gives me hope. Colt thinks he's dealing with a few frightened townspeople. He has no idea what he's really up against. As they prepared for bed, Clara caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different, somehow stronger, more determined. The schoolteacher was still there, but she'd been joined by someone else, a woman who could load a shotgun with steady hands and face down threats with calm resolve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the courage they were building together. But tonight, Clara felt ready for whatever came next. Clara was sweeping the schoolhouse steps on Monday morning when she noticed the stranger watching her from across the street. He was a small, nervous man in a dusty suit, clutching a leather satchel and glancing around as if expecting trouble. When their eyes met, he approached with obvious reluctance. Miss Finch, I'm looking for Samuel Garrison. They said at the hotel you might know where to find him. Who's asking? Clara kept her broom in hand, remembering Sam's lessons about staying alert. Name's Walter Pike. I'm a clerk for Judge Morrison down in Austin. The man wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. I have some papers that need delivering, but I'm told there might be some complications in town. Clara studied the man's frightened face and decided he was genuine. Wait here. I'll fetch him. She found Sam behind Henderson's store, helping unload a supply wagon. One look at her expression, and he set down the crate he was carrying. What's wrong? There's a court clerk looking for you. Says he has papers from Austin. Sam's face went carefully neutral, but Clara saw tension tighten his shoulders. They walked back to the schoolhouse together, where Walter Pike was still shifting nervously from foot to foot. Mr. Garrison, I have documents for you from Judge Morrison's court. Pike fumbled with his satchel, producing a thick envelope sealed with official wax. I was supposed to deliver these last week, but there were some difficulties. On the road. Sam accepted the envelope with steady hands, but Clara noticed the slight tremor in his fingers as he broke the seal. She watched his face as he read, seeing surprise, then something that might have been hope, followed by a complex mix of emotions she couldn't identify. What is it? She asked quietly. Sam handed her the papers without a word. The official letterhead read, "State of Texas versus Samuel J. Garrison," and what followed made Clara's heart stop. It was a wanted poster, Sam's photograph, a detailed description, and an offer of $500 for his capture. But as she read further, her confusion grew. According to the documents, Sam was wanted not for the killing of a corrupt sheriff, but for the murder of his own wife and the theft of $10,000 from an Austin bank. "I don't understand," Clara said, looking between the papers and Sam's stricken face. Pike cleared his throat nervously. "There are more documents, ma'am. Recent ones." With shaking hands, Clara found the second set of papers, a letter from the Texas Attorney General's office, dated just 2 weeks prior. As she read, the truth began to emerge, and it was worse than anything she'd imagined. The corrupt Sheriff Sam had killed Sheriff Blake. Morrison had indeed been corrupt, but he'd also been the judge's brother. When Sam fled Texas, Morrison had used his influence to fabricate charges against him. The bank robbery was fictional, but Sam's wife, a woman named Elena, whom he'd never mentioned, had indeed been murdered. Not by Sam, but by Wade Colt himself, in retaliation for Sam's pursuit of his gang. "I'm sorry," Pike said quietly, "but there's more. The Attorney General's been investigating the Morrison family for months. They found evidence that Sheriff Morrison was taking money from cattle rustlers, including Wade Colt. When Ranger Garrison got too close to the truth, Morrison arranged for Mrs. Garrison to be killed." Clara sank onto the schoolhouse steps, the papers scattered around her. "Elena was your wife." Sam's voice was barely audible. "She was. I never told you because I thought she was safe. I thought if I stayed away, kept moving, Colt would focus on me and leave her alone." His hands clenched into fists. "I was wrong." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Sam hadn't come to Dry Creek just seeking companionship. He'd been running from false charges while carrying the guilt of his wife's murder. His proposal to Clara hadn't been entirely honest. It had been the desperate act of a man who'd lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ashes. "You lied to me," Clara said, the words coming out flatter than she'd intended. "Yes." Sam made no attempt to defend himself. "I lied about why I left Texas, about why I was really wanted. I told myself I was protecting you by not revealing the full truth, but the honest reason is that I was ashamed." Pike shifted uncomfortably. "There's good news in those papers too, ma'am. The Attorney General is offering full amnesty to Mr. Garrison in exchange for his testimony against the Morrison family and Wade Colt. All charges would be dropped." Clara barely heard him. She was remembering every conversation she'd had with Sam, every moment when she'd sensed he was holding something back. The careful way he'd spoken about his past, his reluctance to discuss his time in Texas, the haunted look that sometimes crossed his face when he thought she wasn't watching. "You let me believe you were just a lonely man seeking companionship," she said quietly, "but you were really a fugitive seeking shelter. Clara, please." "No." Clara stood, gathering the scattered papers with shaking hands. "I need to think about this. I need to understand what's real and what's been a lie." She walked into the schoolhouse and closed the door, leaving Sam standing on the steps with Pike. Through the window, she could see them talking in low voices, but she couldn't bring herself to listen. Instead, she sat at her desk and tried to process the revelation that her entire relationship with Sam had been built on deception. The man she'd been falling in love with, the gentle giant who'd brought her flowers and taught her self-defense and made her feel safe for the first time in years, was not who she'd thought he was. He was a widower, carrying the guilt of his wife's murder, a wanted man running from false charges, a former ranger whose past had followed him to Dry Creek and put everyone she cared about in danger. But even as anger and hurt warred in her chest, Clara found herself thinking about the Sam she'd come to know. The man who spoke gently to her students, who'd risked his own safety to defend the town, who'd held her through the thunderstorm and made her feel cherished for the first time in her life. That man was real, regardless of what he'd hidden about his past. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Clara, may I come in?" She opened the door to find Sam alone, his hat in his hands and misery written across his weathered features. "Where's Mr. Pike?" "I sent him to Sheriff Morton with the amnesty offer. He'll be safer at the jail until this business is settled." Sam stepped inside but remained near the door, as if afraid she might ask him to leave. "Clara, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to understand something." "What?" "Everything I've felt for you. Everything that's grown between us, that's been completely honest. I may have lied about my past, but I never lied about caring for you." Sam's voice grew thick with emotion. "You saved me, Clara. Not just from loneliness, but from the guilt and shame that were eating me alive. You made me remember what it felt like to hope for a future." Clara studied his face, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with beneath the revelations about his past. "Elena, did you love her very much?" "I did, but it was a different kind of love, young, passionate, built on dreams rather than reality." Sam took a careful step closer. "What I feel for you is deeper, built on respect and understanding and shared experience. It's the love of a man who knows what loss means and values what he's found." The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Clara felt her anger beginning to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of the man before her. Sam hadn't lied to deceive her. He'd lied to protect both of them from a past that had already claimed too much. "The amnesty offer," she said finally. "What does it mean?" "It means I can stop running. It means we can have a real future together, if you'll still have me." Sam's voice grew stronger. "But first, I have to face Colt and end this. Not just for us, but for Elena's memory, and for everyone in this town who suffered because of my past." Clara looked at this man who'd brought both love and danger into her life, and made her choice. "Then we face him together. But Sam, no more lies between us. Whatever comes next, we meet it with complete honesty. I promise." Sam's relief was palpable. "No more lies, Clara, only truth from here on." Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of storms ahead. But inside the schoolhouse, two people who'd found each other across the wreckage of their pasts were preparing to fight for the future they'd chosen together. The letter from the governor arrived on Thursday morning, carried by a federal marshal who'd ridden hard from Austin. Clara watched from her kitchen window as Sheriff Morton and the marshal approached her house, their faces grim but determined. In the marshal's hand was an official envelope bearing the seal of the state of Texas. Sam met them at the gate, and Clara joined him as Marshal Davis introduced himself. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the steady eyes of someone accustomed to dangerous work. "Mr. Garrison, I have an official communication from Governor Roberts." Davis handed over the envelope with ceremony. "You'll want to read this carefully." Clara held her breath as Sam broke the seal and unfolded the document. She watched his expression change as he read, seeing surprise give way to something that looked remarkably like hope. "What is it?" she asked. Sam's voice was thick with emotion as he read aloud. "By the authority vested in me as Governor of the state of Texas, I hereby grant full and unconditional amnesty to Samuel James Garrison, formerly of the Texas Rangers, for all charges related to the fabricated accusations brought by the Morrison family. In recognition of his faithful service to the people of Texas and the injustices he has suffered, Mr. Garrison is hereby restored to full citizenship with all rights and privileges thereof." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. After 8 years of running, hiding, carrying the weight of false accusations, Sam was finally free. "There's more," Marshal Davis said. "The governor is prepared to reactivate your Ranger Commission if you're willing to help us end Wade Colt's operation permanently. We've been tracking him across 3 states, and this is our best chance to bring him to justice." Sam folded the letter carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Colt's made a mistake coming here. He's isolated, overconfident, And he doesn't know about the amnesty. We can use that." Davis gestured toward the hills north of town. "We have a company of rangers positioned 5 miles out, but we need someone who knows Colt's methods to help us end this without bloodshed in the town." Clara found herself thinking of Elena, the woman whose murder had set this entire tragedy in motion. Sam had carried guilt for her death for 8 years, believing he could have protected her if he'd made different choices. Now he had a chance not just for personal redemption, but to ensure that Colt could never hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt them. "I need time to think about it," Sam said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long. Our intelligence suggests Colt is planning something big for this weekend." After the marshal left, Clara and Sam sat in her parlor. The governor's letter spread on the table between them like a map to a new future. "You're going to accept," Clara said. "It wasn't a question. I don't know. Part of me wants nothing more than to pin on a badge again and see justice done. But another part," Sam looked at her directly, "another part wants to take this amnesty and disappear with you somewhere Colt will never find us. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, wondering when he'll hurt another innocent family." Clara shook her head. "That's not the man I fell in love with, Sam. The man I love faces his demons instead of running from them." That afternoon, word spread through Dry Creek that something important was happening. Clara watched from the schoolhouse as small groups of townspeople gathered in front of Henderson's store, their conversations urgent and hushed. She dismissed her students early and found Martha Henderson waiting for her with news. "There's been a meeting," Martha said without preamble. "The men have been talking farmers, shopkeepers, even old Mr. Peterson. They want to help. Help how? However they can. Tom Patterson may be laid up with broken ribs, but he sent word that his barn is available for storing supplies. The ministers offered the church as a gathering place. Even Mrs. Hendricks," Martha's eyes sparkled with amusement, "has volunteered to coordinate food for anyone who needs to stay in town over the weekend." Clara felt a surge of pride in her community. These were people who'd lived their entire lives avoiding trouble, yet when faced with a real threat to their way of life, they'd chosen to stand together. "What does Sheriff Morton think of all this?" "He's grateful, but worried. He keeps saying this isn't a job for civilians." Martha lowered her voice. "But between you and me, I think he's relieved to know he won't be facing this alone." That evening, Clara and Sam walked through town together, ostensibly heading to the church for choir practice, but really taking the opportunity to see how their neighbors were preparing. What they found surprised them both. Henderson's store had been quietly fortified, with heavy crates positioned near the windows and additional ammunition stocked behind the counter. The blacksmith's shop showed signs of recent weapon repair. Several rifles and shotguns gleamed with fresh oil and care. Even the schoolhouse had been prepared, with the children's desks arranged to provide cover and supplies hidden in the storage closet. "They're getting ready for war," Sam observed quietly. "They're getting ready to defend their home," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." At the church, they found nearly the entire adult population of Dry Creek gathered for what was officially a prayer meeting, but was clearly a war council. Reverend Murphy, a gentleman more accustomed to discussions of salvation than strategy, looked somewhat overwhelmed by the martial atmosphere in his sanctuary. Sheriff Morton stood at the front of the room, a map of the town spread on the communion table. "Folks, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I need you to understand what we're facing. These aren't common criminals, they're killers who won't hesitate to hurt innocent people. Which is exactly why we can't let them have their way," Tom Patterson called from the back pew, where he sat despite his wife's protests. His face was still swollen and discolored, but his voice was strong. "I've got children in this town, Sheriff. We all do. Sometimes a man has to fight for what matters." Marshal Davis stepped forward, his federal authority lending weight to his words. "What Mr. Patterson says is true, but fighting takes more than courage. It takes planning and discipline. Anyone who stays to help needs to follow orders without question." Over the next hour, they organized the town's defense with military precision. The women and children would shelter in the church basement, which had thick stone walls and only one entrance. The men would be positioned at strategic points throughout town, with the most experienced shots covering the main approaches. Sam would work with the Rangers to coordinate the overall strategy. "What about after?" asked Mrs. Peterson, her elderly voice cutting through the tactical discussions. "What happens to our town when this is over?" It was Clara who answered. "We rebuild, like we always have. We take care of each other. And we remember that when evil came to Dry Creek, good people stood up to it." As the meeting broke up, people lingered to shake hands, exchange words of encouragement, and make final preparations. Clara found herself surrounded by her former students, grown men and women now, but still seeking her approval for their brave choices. "Miss Finch," said Robert Henderson, Martha's eldest son, "I want you to know that everything you taught us about doing what's right, it mattered. We're not going to let anyone hurt you, or Mr. Sam." Walking home under a canopy of stars, Clara and Sam reflected on the extraordinary transformation they'd witnessed. A quiet farming community had organized itself into something approaching a militia, not out of bloodlust or hatred, but out of love for their neighbors and determination to protect their way of life. "I keep thinking about Elena," Sam said as they reached Clara's front gate, "about how different things might have been if she'd had a community like this standing with her." Clara took his arm, feeling the strength there but also the gentleness. "She had you, Sam, and you did everything you could to protect her. Sometimes that's not enough, but it doesn't mean the effort was wasted. Tomorrow, when I pin on that badge again, I want you to know something." Sam stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I'm not doing this just for Elena's memory, or even for justice. I'm doing it so we can have the future we both deserve, a future without fear, without looking over our shoulders, without the past casting shadows on our happiness." Clara reached up and touched his weathered cheek. "I know, and I'll be right there with you, whatever comes." That night, as they made their final preparations, checking weapons, reviewing plans, writing letters to be delivered if the worst happened, Clara felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring danger, possibly death, certainly change, but it would also bring resolution, the end of a chapter that had been too long in the writing. In her bedroom, she opened her jewelry box one final time and removed her mother's wedding ring. Tomorrow, she decided, she would wear it not as a symbol of dreams deferred, but as a talisman of love found and courage claimed. The future, whatever it held, was theirs to shape together. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, with a sharp wind that set the schoolhouse bell ringing intermittently as Clara prepared for what might be her last day of teaching. She'd risen before dawn to find Sam already dressed in his ranger gear, the badge polished and pinned to his vest, his gun belt worn with the familiarity of long practice. Before leaving the house, he'd pressed his father's pocket watch into her hands. The gold was warm from his body heat, the inscription worn but still readable, "To Samuel Sr. for faithful service. Time and courage, always. This belonged to my father and his father before him," Sam had said, closing her fingers around the precious timepiece. "It's supposed to bring luck to those who carry it into battle. I want you to have it a promise that I'm coming back to you." Now Clara sat at her desk, the watch tucked safely in her apron pocket, watching her 9 students work on their arithmetic with unusual concentration. Even the children seemed to sense that something momentous was approaching. Tommy Patterson kept glancing toward the windows, while young Sarah Henderson had barely spoken since arriving. At precisely 10 o'clock, the attack began. Clara heard the thunder of hoofbeats before she saw the riders, 8 men in dark coats sweeping down Main Street like a storm front. She immediately rang the school bell 3 times, the signal they'd arranged to warn the town, then began moving her students toward the back of the room. "Children, we're going to play a special game," she said with forced calm. "We're going to hide quietly in the storage room until I tell you it's safe to come out." But before she could get them all to safety, the schoolhouse door exploded inward. Wade Colt stood in the doorway, his pale eyes scanning the room with predatory interest. He was smaller than Clara had expected, but there was something about his stillness that spoke of coiled violence. Well, the famous schoolmarm. Colt stepped inside, followed by two of his men. You must be the woman who's got Sam Garrison thinking he can settle down and play house. Clara positioned herself between Colt and her students, her hand moving instinctively toward the pocket that held Sam's watch. Get out of my schoolhouse. You have no business with children. Colt's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, but I do. You see, these little ones are my insurance. As long as I have them, your ranger friend won't try anything heroic. Through the window, Clara could see chaos erupting throughout the town. Gunfire echoed from the direction of Henderson's store, and smoke was rising from somewhere near the blacksmith's shop. But she forced herself to focus on the immediate threat, 3 armed men in a room full of frightened children. What do you want? She asked, hoping to buy time. I want Sam Garrison to face me like a man, instead of hiding behind town councils and federal marshals. Colt moved closer, and Clara caught the scent of whiskey and old violence. I'm going to send him a message he can't ignore. One of his men, the brutal-faced Jake Brennan, grabbed young Tommy Patterson by the arm. This one will do. Pretty little boy bet Garrison's got a soft spot for him. No! Clara lunged forward without thinking, but Colt caught her wrist in a grip like iron. Easy there, schoolmarm. Nobody gets hurt if everyone does what they're told. His pale eyes held hers. You're going to walk outside with me and call for your man. When he comes running to save you, we'll settle this properly. But Clara had spent 30 years managing difficult situations, and she wasn't about to let these men use her students as pawns. As Colt relaxed his grip slightly, she drove her elbow backward into his stomach with all the force Sam had taught her. The outlaw doubled over with a curse, giving Clara the opening she needed. Children, run! She shouted, pushing Tommy toward the back door. Get to the church! Most of the students scattered like startled birds, but Sarah Henderson tripped and fell. Brennan lunged for her, but Clara grabbed her grandmother's shotgun from where she'd hidden it behind her desk. The weapon felt solid and familiar in her hands as she swung it toward the outlaw. Touch that child and I'll blow you in half, Clara said with deadly calm. Brennan froze, recognizing the look in her eyes. This wasn't some frightened schoolteacher, this was a woman protecting her young, and she meant every word. The standoff lasted only seconds before gunfire erupted outside the schoolhouse. Sam's voice carried clearly across the chaos. Colt, face me, you coward! Leave the children out of this! Colt straightened slowly, his hand moving toward his gun. Looks like your heroes arrived, schoolmarm, but this isn't going to end the way you think it will. Clara kept the shotgun trained on Brennan while tracking Colt with her peripheral vision. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. Sam's watch seemed to pulse against her leg like a second heartbeat, reminding her of his promise to return. Outside, the battle for Dry Creek was about to reach its climax. The schoolhouse bell began ringing frantically, not Clara's measured warning signal, but the wild, desperate clanging of someone pulling the rope in panic. Through the broken doorway, Clara could see that young Tommy Patterson had reached the bell tower and was sounding the alarm with all his strength. The ringing transformed everything. What had been a surprise attack became a rallying cry that brought the entire town running. Clara heard answering shouts from every direction as Dry Creek's defenders emerged from their hiding places. Damn that kid! Brennan snarled, but Clara saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. This wasn't going according to their plan. Outside, Sam's voice cut through the chaos with ranger authority. Colt, I'm here. Let's finish this. Colt moved toward the doorway, his hand on his gun, but Clara could see the calculation in his pale eyes. He'd expected to face a frightened town and an isolated ex-ranger. Instead, he was hearing the coordinated response of an organized defense. Your friends are braver than I expected, he said to Clara, but courage won't stop bullets. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made everyone freeze. Through the window, Clara saw Marshal Davis leading a company of Texas Rangers down Main Street at full gallop. The federal reinforcements had arrived precisely when needed. Colt's expression shifted from confidence to rage. "You set a trap." "No," Clara said firmly, still holding the shotgun on Brennan. "You set a trap for yourself the moment you decided to hurt innocent people." The outlaw leader spun toward the window, assessing his rapidly deteriorating situation. His men were scattered throughout town, facing organized resistance they hadn't expected. The Rangers were closing in from the north. His carefully planned revenge was collapsing into chaos. "Brennan, Vega, we're leaving, now." But as they moved toward the door, Sam appeared in the doorway, his Colt, 45, drawn and ready. Behind him, Clara could see Sheriff Morton and several townspeople taking positions. "Nobody's leaving until we settle accounts," Sam said quietly. His badge caught the morning light, and Clara saw in his stance the confident lawman he'd once been. "Wade Colt, you're under arrest for murder, cattle rustling, and conspiracy against the peace of Texas." Colt's laugh was bitter. "You think that badge makes you righteous, Garrison? You killed my brother. Your brother was shooting at innocent people. I stopped him from killing a deputy." Sam's voice carried no apology. "Just like I'm going to stop you from hurting anyone else." The tension in the room stretched tight as a wire. Clara could feel violence trembling in the air, waiting for someone to make the first move. But then something unexpected happened. Tommy Patterson's voice rang out from the bell tower. "The children are safe. Miss Finch got them all to the church." The announcement seemed to deflate some of Colt's desperate energy. His plan had depended on having hostages, on forcing Sam into an impossible choice between justice and mercy. Without leverage, he was just another outlaw facing superior numbers and the righteous anger of an entire community. Clara saw the moment when Colt accepted his defeat. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his hand moved away from his gun. "I surrender," he said quietly. But Brennan had different ideas. With a snarl of rage, he lunged for his weapon, forcing Clara to pull the trigger on her grandmother's shotgun. The blast was deafening in the confined space, and Brennan went down hard, clutching his shoulder. The gunshot seemed to release all the pent-up tension. Through the windows, Clara could hear the sounds of surrender men calling out that they were laying down their arms, horses being corralled, the authoritative voices of Rangers taking control. Sam moved quickly to secure Colt's weapon, while Sheriff Morton and Marshal Davis dealt with the wounded Brennan. Within minutes, the schoolhouse that had been a battleground was filled with the organized bustle of law enforcement processing prisoners. Clara set down her smoking shotgun and found herself suddenly shaking with reaction. The danger was over, but her body seemed to need time to understand that fact. "Clara!" Sam was beside her instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her trembling form. "You're safe. It's over." She pulled back to look at him, noting the powder burns on his vest and the cut above his left eye. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious. You?" "No. The children? All safe. Tommy's bell ringing got them to the church in time." Sam's smile was fierce with pride. "You were magnificent, Clara. Absolutely magnificent." Marshal Davis approached them, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Finch, I want you to know that your quick thinking and courage saved lives today. If you hadn't protected those children and delayed Colt's men, this could have been much worse." Clara touched the pocket where Sam's watch rested, feeling its steady tick like a heartbeat. They'd kept their promise to each other, they'd both survived, and they'd done it together. Outside, the bell continued ringing, but now it sounded like celebration rather than warning. Dry Creek had faced its greatest test and emerged victorious, stronger for having stood together against those who would do them harm. 3 weeks later, Clara stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the new wedding ring set that Sam had purchased from a traveling jeweler. The rings were simple gold bands, but they gleamed with promise in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her lace curtains. The first wedding had been a hurried affair before a justice of the peace, conducted while Sam was still technically a fugitive. This ceremony would be different, a celebration in the church, surrounded by the community that had stood with them through their darkest hour. "You look beautiful," Martha Henderson said from the doorway, carrying a bouquet of late autumn flowers. "Are you ready?" Clara touched the rings one final time, then turned from the mirror. "I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until Sam knocked on my door." The church was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the front steps. Clara was amazed to see faces from neighboring towns. Word of Dry Creek's brave stand had spread throughout the territory, and folks had come from miles around to witness the wedding of the schoolteacher and the ranger who'd become local legends. As she walked down the aisle on Sheriff Morton's arm, Clara saw the faces of her students beaming from the front pew. Tommy Patterson, his hero worship of Sam now tempered with genuine respect for Clara's courage, gave her an encouraging thumbs up. Even Mrs. Hendricks dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, having apparently decided that Clara's unconventional romance was acceptably dramatic for her tastes. Sam waited at the altar in his best suit, his ranger badge polished and prominently displayed. Marshal Davis stood beside him as best man, representing not just friendship, but the federal government's gratitude for his service. The sight of Sam's weathered face breaking into a smile as she approached made Clara's heart flutter like a schoolgirl's. Reverend Murphy had outdone himself with the ceremony, weaving together themes of courage, commitment, and community that seemed perfectly suited to their unique story. When the time came for vows, Sam and Clara had chosen to speak their own words rather than traditional promises. "Clara," Sam said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the packed church, "when I knocked on your door that evening, I thought I was offering you protection. I didn't understand that you were the one who would save me from loneliness, from guilt, from a past that had trapped me for too long. You taught me that courage isn't about facing down outlaws with guns. Real courage is opening your heart when you've been hurt, standing up for what's right when it's easier to stay quiet, and choosing love when the world gives you every reason to choose fear." Clara felt tears threatening as she responded, "Sam, you came into my life when I'd convinced myself that quiet resignation was wisdom. You showed me that it's never too late to choose adventure, never too late to fight for what matters, never too late to love and be loved in return. You didn't just offer me protection, you gave me partnership, respect, and the courage to become the woman I was always meant to be." The exchange of rings was accompanied by cheers from the congregation, particularly loud ones from the children. When Reverend Murphy pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was gentle but thorough, earning approving whistles from the younger men in attendance. The reception was held in Henderson's store, which had been cleared of merchandise and decorated with bunting and flowers. Tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes prepared by every woman in town, and someone had produced a fiddle for dancing. Clara found herself swept into conversation after conversation, receiving congratulations and well wishes from people who had become more than neighbors. They had become family. Mrs. Garrison," Tommy Patterson appeared at her elbow. "Are you really going to keep teaching?" "Of course, Tommy. Mrs. Garrison the teacher, Mrs. Garrison the wife. I'm still the same person, just with more happiness than I knew what to do with." As the evening progressed, Clara noticed Sam deep in conversation with Marshal Davis and several other rangers. When she approached, she caught the tail end of their discussion. "Position would be based here in Dry Creek," Davis was saying. "Someone needs to coordinate law enforcement for this part of the territory, and after what happened here, we can't think of anyone better qualified." Sam looked to Clara before answering. "What do you think? Ready to be married to a lawman permanently?" Clara considered the offer, thinking of all the ways their lives had changed since that first evening on her porch. "I think," she said slowly, "that some people are called to teach children, some are called to enforce justice, and some are lucky enough to find partners who support their calling." She smiled up at her husband. Besides, after facing down Wade Colt in my own schoolhouse, I think I can handle whatever challenges come with being a ranger's wife. As the reception wound down and guests began heading home, Clara and Sam found themselves alone on the church steps, looking out over the town that had become truly theirs through trial and triumph. "Any regrets?" Sam asked, echoing the question from their early courtship. Clara thought of her mother's wedding ring, now retired to the music box in favor of the new set that marked this fresh beginning. She thought of her father's Bible, which would now guide a household instead of just one lonely woman. She thought of her grandmother's shotgun, cleaned and returned to the attic, but ready if ever needed again. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," she said, taking his arm as they walked toward home. A year later, Clara would be teaching a classroom that included 2 new students, children whose families had moved to Dry Creek specifically because they'd heard it was the kind of place where ordinary people did extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. Sam would be wearing his ranger badge with pride, keeping peace across a territory that respected both his authority and his character. But on this perfect autumn evening, newlyweds walked home together under a canopy of stars, their futures stretching ahead like an unwritten story, full of promise and possibility.